Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Uranio Paes.
Today we are talking about the 9 types at work.
Yes, very interesting. It will make me remember the many years I spent as a teacher, consultant, and coach in organizations doing a lot of Enneagram work, mostly in South America because I'm from Brazil, but also in other places. And those were good moments, and I learned quite a bit. And so did you, B?
Right. Yes, I've been a psychotherapist by training, but over the last 10 or 12 years, I've gradually migrated to doing more coaching and leadership development and work with teams. So, yeah, we both have experience working in companies, helping people develop using the Enneagram.
It can help people and organizations themselves really thrive in different ways, different kinds of applications. And there's such a hunger in organizations to know more about the Enneagram now, because sometimes they say they don't want more of the same, all the things that they have been doing. And the Enneagram is quite interesting.
Yes, there's a way that, in contrast to some of the other personality typologies out there that get used in business, the Enneagram goes very deep. It's not only growth oriented, but there are a lot of different ways that you can use it to understand yourself and what's happening between you and the people that you work with.
Yes, and especially now that the millennials are reaching up to more strategic jobs in organizations of all kinds. It seems to me that there is a true opening for Enneagram work in there. But B, can you start mentioning, please, some of the areas that the Enneagram can help or functions in organizations?
I think the Enneagram is excellent at helping leaders develop. So understanding your leadership style, understanding your work style, how you relate to other people from the position of authority. I think leadership development is one area. I also think team development or team dynamics, improving the work that teams do together by helping them understand each other and helping them see that they each may have a different perspective on things. And then also look at the team map. What does it say about your team and what it might be good at and challenged by, considering the mix of types on your team? Also, as you said, in organization development, I think it can help people understand organizational culture and they can embed it in different ways in the full development of the organization. And then I think, kind of the bread and butter of what we're talking about is workplace relationships. So how do I understand the person I'm working with in a clearer way, given that we may be different, and it can be hard at work where you're not exactly supposed to share all your feelings or make yourself vulnerable, to get to know someone that you work with in a way that helps you work really well together. And I think the Enneagram is the perfect tool for that because it provides so much information about people, as much as they're willing to share. But it also, even more than that, provides a neutral language for people to use to talk about what's happening between them without creating defensiveness. I heard a lot of stories when I was working. I hear stories all the time when I work in companies where people say something like this: I used to not get along with my boss or my peer. We kept having the same conflict. I didn't really understand what was wrong with him. But then we learned the Enneagram, and we could see the different types that we both were, and we could talk about our point of view based on our type and realize why we may have been having a disagreement, why we're seeing things from a different perspective, and no one's right or wrong. So it reduces defensiveness in the way people talk about what's happening between them. And it gives them a language to say, oh, well, it's just that, I'm a 6 and you're a 3. And so we're looking at this issue in completely different ways, and it makes sense that we might have this conflict. But by seeing what we're each bringing to the table in terms of our personality patterns, we can easily work this out.
So, yes, those were the areas that I worked a lot. And sometimes the Enneagram can get into very specific needs behind those areas, such as communication patterns that can be always better between people, conflict resolutions. I did a lot of work on that theme with both individuals interpersonally and more systemically within teams. And the Enneagram works very well in that. Also, projects helping people figure out best ways not only to work together, um, but also jobs that each person or roles that each person can do so that a project can go better. And I did quite a bit of work with productivity management and time management using the Enneagram. There was another company that I introduced the Enneagram in the context of negotiations. Yeah, so it's very interesting. And of course, the format of using the Enneagram in coaching is brilliant. There are many people doing good work with that, and it's perhaps even more promising that we have been seeing. So it's wonderful. It's so interesting to bring the Enneagram to organizations. But I also think that in here, our intention at this podcast is to talk about how you can use the Enneagram in any occupation you have, any job, not only in the corporate world. I think it's how each of the nine types plays out in any work situation.
Yes, and I also think it can help people understand their own relationship to work, in terms of how they relate to work. So this is at the level of just pure self-awareness. Some people struggle in life to find a career path or to know what kind of work they want to do. Some people get too involved in work. Some people can't decide whether to go in one direction or another and what has the most value to them. So I think also understanding your Enneagram type can help you just at a very basic level understand how does work fit into your life and how do you relate to, it could be making money or promoting yourself or owning your strengths in terms of what you have to bring to the world. I know for myself, when I was younger in my 20s, I had a lot of anxiety because as I got out of college and started, what would be the beginning of my work years, I had no idea what I wanted to do in the world, and I was insecure around what not really knowing myself or what my strengths were, which kind of fits with being a two, because as a two, sometimes your sense of yourself isn't very clear, especially when you're young. You can tune in really well to other people, but you don't really know what you need or who you are in a certain way. So for me, it took me a while to get to the point where I felt a clear sense of kind of my calling when it came to work. So I think that's another example of the way it can help people with respect to the general topic of work. And as we talked about preparing for this podcast, we said, we could do a podcast on a lot of these different topics, and so maybe we will going forward.
Yes, yes, it will be good in the future. Good idea.
Anything else you want to say about the topic, the general topic of the Enneagram and how it can help people with respect to work?
While you were talking, I remembered a specific piece of work I did in a company that they had a problem that nobody would look at risks. Nobody would go against the norm or what the leader was saying. And then when we ran an Enneagram workshop, we found out that there were no fours, no sixes, and no eights. Actually, there were two or three among those three types in a team of 42 people. And then they realized that they didn't have those more oppositional types then. And that was unfortunate for what they needed. They needed that skill. They needed to have more types like those or people playing that role. I remember this because people realize the importance of having a team with different types. And now, with the theme of diversity, why not talking about the diversity of personalities?
Yes, and that relates to what I sometimes do with teams is looking at the team map, which I think is such an important thing to do, and people usually find it fascinating. You know, who has ended up being on the team, and like you said, what are we missing that if we don't know that we're missing that, we can not really take care of a certain function without realizing it. Should we So, shall we talk about the 9 types in terms of what strengths they bring to work and what issues and tendencies they may have when working with others? So, let's start with type 8. Let's talk about some strengths and challenges. So, what do you think are some of the good things that eights bring to work and some challenging tendencies?
First thing to me is that eights help break away from the more traditional, standardized corporate mentality because of their authenticity, sincerity. They're not the most political in terms of doing things behind the back, and they really help organizations be more truthful. Now, many aides enjoy organizational settings, on the other hand, because there is the hierarchical ladder that they can climb and go up levels, and they feel stimulated by that. Aides are good in occupying empty spaces of power and take the lead, even if they don't have a formal job to do so. Now, on the other hand, sometimes aides have that leadership style that was more accepted in the past in organizations. And I'm talking here about the basic aide personality of being directive, centralizing things, not involving people as much in strategy discussions or other things, or finding it hard to be patient, to listen to people, being domineering. So that is a bit odd in terms of leadership style. Now, what I see on the other hand is that when aides do inner work and develop, they become one of the most fascinating leaders in this new model of leadership that organizations expect.
I think eights are really good at looking at the big picture and taking on big challenges. They tend to be fearless leaders and very protective of the team in ways that I think make people feel supportive. But I also think sometimes they can be intimidating. They often don't look at the details when they really need to. Of course, not all eights will do that, but some of them. And they can think that their view is the only view. It can be hard for them to see that other people may have views of reality that make sense or that are maybe more accurate than theirs.
So, B, what do you think would be one challenge for aides uh, if they want to get better at work?
I find that a lot of the eights I work with need to learn to be more approachable. So that can mean sharing something about themselves that most people don't know. It can mean smiling more. It can mean sharing a little bit more about what they did on their weekend to help them be a little bit softer in their presentation. What about you?
I would suggest to work on the energy level, to lower down your energy when you're about to approach someone else physically or just to talk to another person. even on video maybe, because sometimes dates are intimidating regardless of what they say or don't say. It's something related to having a big energy that impacts the other.
Good idea.
Shall we talk about type 9?
Yes, let's talk about type 9.
You can start now.
So, in terms of strengths, I think nines tend to get along with others very easily. Usually, people will say they really like the nine they work with. They find them easygoing and easy to get along with. They also tend to be good mediators, oriented toward connecting with others, and sincerely helpful and humble. What about you? What do you think are some of the strengths of type 9?
Many times I see that nines in organizations make things happen because they're quite good in keeping operations going on. By the way, I've seen so many COOs, chief operational officers, that were nines in my life. And they have this talent to engage people by just giving them space and autonomy.
On the other hand, I think sometimes Nine's humility, the way they can be self-deprecating and not need to have a big ego about things, can mean they aren't making themselves important enough. They may not come forward with their ideas in a proactive way. They may not assert power in ways that would be good for people. Also, I think sometimes they can be passively resistant. They may not buy into an idea, and then as things are going along, they may realize I never really agreed to this, and they can drag their feet. They can, seem like they're in agreement when they're really not, and not voice that. And of course, they can avoid difficult conversations if they feel fearful of conflict. What about you? What do you think can be more challenging tendencies for nines at work?
Two challenges that come to my mind. First is that nines sometimes don't challenge people who are having poorer performances. I've seen sometimes that other people on the team who were high performers got really disappointed at the nine because they were trying to please everybody and treat them totally equally. And it didn't seem very fair to the high potentials because they they thought the nine should ask more from the low performers. And nines don't promote themselves and don't take care of their careers.
So, what would be a challenge for a nine that you might pose for them to look at work?
Practice saying no and going against. Say that you disagree. And here's the deal, even if you're not completely sure about it, try it. Give it a try. See how you feel when you go against or say no.
Yeah, I would say a similar thing, which is speak up more. Say what you're thinking. Sometimes nines have great ideas, but they're not putting them in the mix. They're kind of waiting for other people to go first. So say what you're thinking more and earlier. So, how about ones? What do you think are some particular strengths of ones when they're working?
Ones are really good in creating processes or following processes, improving them also. And they they have very high quality bars many times, inspiring others not only because they work hard, but because they tend to do things well. Now, when it comes to leadership, they may become a little too strict, don't you think?
Yes, I do. I think they can be a bit rigid, let's say. I think on the positive side, from my point of view, they can be very ethical and responsible and very quality oriented. So really focused on how can we be producing the best product we can, and have a lot of integrity as we do it. How can we do things in an honest way, in a way where we're being transparent? And I think they're also very good at making sure people are held accountable in fair ways.
I agree with that. That's a talent that ones have. Now, Many times they get resentful with the fact that others are not carrying as much load as they are. They may store a lot of anger in the inside that leaks out in interesting ways, but mainly that does some damage to themselves.
And I think it can leak out, especially as criticism. I think often in a work setting, ones may criticize to try to help people. They may offer a critique to help people do better, but other people can experience it as a painful kind of criticism. And like you're saying, when ones don't recognize that they're angry inside or at a deeper level, it can leak out through criticism or through tension or in different behaviors that reveal a kind of irritation or resentment that they may not be fully conscious of. I also think they can be excessively hard on themselves. They can think that they need to be monitoring themselves so that they can do a good job and stay uh, focused on what they need to, but they don't often realize that it's too much and they're actually creating more stress for themselves. And then another thing I would say that I've seen happen a lot for ones is they have a hard time delegating. They have a hard time passing on power even when it's time to have a succession plan. And delegation can be challenging because ones can sometimes feel like no one can do it as well as they do. They have very high standards, and it may be hard for them to accept someone else's work if it's not 100%. And that again puts pressure on other people to have to do it really, really well when maybe the one needs to realize that 80% can be good enough. And maybe that will be my challenge for the ones. Can you see when you may be pushing for a 100% quality level and that's both unrealistic uh, and damaging in terms of creating more stress for everybody? Can you accept a slightly lower level of quality, realizing that it's actually good enough?
Commenting on what you've just said, I saw once a one on a team working for a big bank that was disappointed at the fact that he would never be promoted, despite the fact that he was seen by everybody in the area as being one of the most important professionals around. And then together we realized that this was because he had specialized too much and started doing all the tasks in his particular job in such a good way that became someone very hard to replace. And his bosses would not think of bringing him out of that area, just raise his salary a little bit, but not give him the promotion. So sometimes I think that ones create this kind of trap for themselves. But my challenge for ones is that they study a bit more what modern leadership is in itself, like being more participatory and flexible. And this will help them to adapt to this new leadership system, listening better, engaging people, getting people's opinions, and they become more people oriented and not just process oriented.
That's great. Okay, so shall we go to type two? Do you want to start by telling us all the great things about twos at work?
Of course, Beatrice, and it will all be true. So I think that Jews are brilliant in keeping good relationships and being the leader that is behind other people, like servant leaders, helping others. And they are also great in letting people feel good about themselves and help them be more productive. Might be a bit difficult at times when the situation is not as easy and they need to be harsh at someone. But they also find ways to do it in smart approaches. And I saw this in you. I've always seen this in you, B. You find it easy to understand what people need. me, other people and CP Enneagram Academy, you understand what we are going through, even if we don't explain you. So people feel that true leaders care about them.
Yes, I do think that twos are really good at focusing on relationships and people when it comes to work in a way that really helps the work. I've always thought it's always been my lens on the world that work happens through people and through relationships. And I think it helps to be tuned into what are the quality of the relationships? Are people being taken care of? Are there stresses happening within people that then can translate into stresses in relationships, stresses that create problems with the work? So I think that's a big strength. I also think that, and maybe this is just me, but I think twos can be practical. I think they can really look at what's working, what's not working, and almost connecting what works for the people and the task. Is this person going to be able to complete that task? What do I need to do to support that person or empower that person in order that they can do the work? So I've always thought that I have a real practical streak in that I want to really focus on what's realistic and what works and what's fair for people. And I think those are things that can help work get done well. So I'm almost afraid to ask, what do you think is more challenging for twos when working?
Two things. One is to pay a little less attention to relationships and emotions and pay a bit more attention to tasks, but even more than that, to keeping the logic in what needs to be done, regardless of the current emotions. And the second thing would be allowing people to be more truly independent from them, that people can just grow beyond them as leaders.
I think that what can be challenging for twos is emotions. I think that twos are just we're just emotional, and sometimes things happen at work that make us emotional. And traditionally, there's been this idea that you're not supposed to express emotion in work relationships or at work. And I think this is actually changing a little bit. I quote a line from a Tony Schwartz Harvard Business Review article in my book, The Nine Types of Leadership, where he says it used to be that we believed that we should check our emotions at the door when we come to work, but that's really shifting because it actually helps people to know each other better, to express a little more vulnerability, to say what's true for them, and to feel free to express a little more emotion. So I think it's changing, but at the same time, of course, twos need to manage their emotion and not make decisions when they're in an emotional space. Also, I think feedback can be challenging for twos because it's too tempting to want to sugarcoat something, or it can be hard to give the sort of straight, direct, constructive criticism that sometimes people need to improve. And also, I would say it can be hard when they need to be liked too much because sometimes you may have to make a tough decision and not everyone will be happy, and you need to be okay with that. So, what's a challenge for twos that you would pose?
Stick to a work agenda and go ahead despite emotions.
I think that's a good one. I also think um, balancing relationships with a business perspective. In other words, it really helped me at one point when my therapist helped me see that certain things weren't personal and I was making them personal. So really try to separate out what's business, what's personal. And I'll sneak in one more. I'll say you're going to get emotional. It's just part of who we are, and I think our emotional sensitivity can be a strength. But process your emotions and then get strategic about what you want to do. So threes, can you say some of what's positive about threes when they're at work?
Threes very often become high performers. They give all of themselves. They are productive. They get motivated more easily, self motivated. They get focused and disciplined most of the time, and they have an ambition that can be good.
Right. I think they are so good at focusing on goals and tasks and just being very, very deeply committed to work. They prioritize work. They often say they enjoy their work. Of course, this can go too far. That's getting into the challenges, but they're really good at delivering results. They're very confident about their ability to deliver results, and in some ways, I think they do really well in business because their focus of attention lines up really well with, especially in the West or in the United States, what we view as success in the workplace, achieving high levels of status, achieving goals, accomplishing tasks in a timely and efficient way. All of these are things that I think threes do very well.
Now, there are challenges, as there are for everybody of all types. One of the challenges for threes is to be who they are at work and not just play roles. And many people of sometimes like eights, fives, ones, sixes, they notice when threes are just playing roles, playing a character as if they were somebody else. It's very unconscious for threes, but these other types get frustrated with that and they stop trusting the three at times. Another challenge, in my view, is that threes can become excessively individualistic. Together with being ambitious, this becomes a bit dangerous. It's not very easy also for threes to own failure as theirs. Sometimes they project that failure out to someone else or even to the team. Unfortunately, that's not a good idea.
Yes, some of the challenges I would say are they can be too work focused. They may not have a good work life balance, and they can sort of do this split where they have their work self and their home self, and they don't bring the two together, and they almost have a belief that that wouldn't work. Also, I think they can be too fast paced at some times. They can leave others behind. They can be hard to connect to. Others can find it hard, like you mentioned, trust. It can be hard for other people to connect to them at a personal level in order to do work well together. And it can also be hard for them to take people into account when they're really heading toward their goals in a strong way. The path to the goal can be the important thing, and they can work around people or run over people if they get in the way between them and their goal. And it can be hard for them to listen to people when they're on the path to the goal. So what's a challenge or something you would suggest threes do to be easier to work with or to be uh, better about some of these challenges that we're naming?
I think it's always a good idea when threes self disclose a little bit more, talking about doubts, lack of self confidence that they can have when they are not sure about one particular decision, or even disclosing something more personal. Because people really like to see the more human side they have.
I agree. And I would build on that by saying, work to get in touch with your feelings, your emotions, and you don't have to share all of them with people, but it will get you more in touch with what's really important to you. So it's not just a goal that's ascribed by the job or the task, but what has meaning to you, bringing that in, and also bringing some of your home self, your weekend persona into your work life can also be good, and it can help people be able to connect with you more. Let's do a short break.
The Enneagram 2.0 podcast goes live every other Thursday on all main platforms. Stay tuned to learn more about yourself and others.
We in Uranio offer much more high-quality Enneagram content on www.cpenneagram.com. If you are an Enneagram enthusiast, visit the website now.
Hello, it's me, Uranio. Just to tell you that B and I launched a new online workshop called the Enneagram Masterclass. It's a 6-hour video course that you can access at cpenneagram.com. You can go at your own pace and have lifetime access to it. Many beginner students have already watched it, but advanced students can also learn about the 9 types in a deeper way. We can't wait for you to check it out. Get $75 off your purchase by using code ChestnutPaes75 on cpenneagram.com. Hi, Uranio here. I would like to suggest that you check out our new complete Enneagram Love Languages online workshop with 9 classes about relationships and each Enneagram type, 90 minutes each. Visit cpenneagram.com and use the code PODLISTENER to have a 15% discount.
So fours, what would you say are some strengths and positive qualities of fours when they're at work?
Fours are usually very creative, innovative, and they always make sure that something can be done better. So quality is something that they usually enhance within a team or an organization. They develop people not as much because they are there for people, but more because they are demanding. They request the best from each person. It's not very easy for fours to be happy or feel content with things that they are. So people need to really make efforts and do their best. People say that 4 leaders are not very easy to work with at times, but after having worked with them, they are remembered sometimes as the most important bosses people have had because they helped people develop. And 4s are also expressive, usually, and this is also good. Now, what do you think, B, that are good things for 4s in organizations?
I think fours often very naturally have a sense of vision, a sense of how they think things should go that can be inspiring to people. I think they value authenticity, and that's a very good thing. They encourage people to be honest and to be themselves. They also may focus on values, on what are the core values of the team or the organization, and what has meaning to us, and how can we infuse our work with meaning and ground what we do in integrity and in values that help everyone get more connected to what's happening, and also kind of stay on course when it comes to being together in what's most important. And again, I think the fact that they are emotionally sensitive and empathic, they tend to have just naturally high emotional intelligence. I think that emotional intelligence is such an important factor at what makes people successful at work that I think that's something that fours just naturally bring in a way they may not even fully own as such a positive as it is. So, what do you think is challenging for fours in the work?
Sometimes 4s tend to compare themselves with other people in a way that's not good in organizations, and they may not see what's already good with themselves and with their teams. When someone shows them a piece of work that has been done, they may not see the good things that are already there. And also, 4s many times run the risk of losing motivation because they feel that something important is missing, and they idealize something that could idealize in the future and be disappointed at the current moment. And many people don't feel very comfortable. They feel like stepping on eggshells when approaching a 4 because they have oscillating humor and emotions.
Yes, I think fours have a big need to be understood, and sometimes they don't verbalize that clearly enough. And yet, if they feel like people don't understand them or don't understand their vision or how they're feeling, it can be an impediment to moving forward. So there can be a problem in the relationship that isn't getting fully articulated as, I need other people to understand this about me. Not necessarily agree with me, but just understand where I'm coming from. And so sometimes I think if there's not a mutual understanding, relationship problems result that can be hard to sort out. I also think that the flip side of being emotionally intelligent is that fours can sometimes be emotional in a way that they don't manage. Other people can experience them as moody or as not wanting to move forward in a certain way that could be rooted in the four's emotional experience. And again, in the way that isn't clearly articulated. Also, I think sometimes fours have a sense of not fitting in. They can feel alienated from a story they're making up in their own head, and not based on what's really happening, or not find ways to connect and to come in and make themselves part of the picture through owning what they're bringing to the table that is good and of value. So, what challenge would you pose for wanting to improve the way they interact at work?
Maybe it could be good for force to know the time to stop trying to change things and innovate, because it's wise sometimes to just pay attention to what is already good and do things that are more simple. Keep things simple, going as they are, because maybe some very special things have already been achieved. And you, what is your challenge?
I would say sometimes to be clearer with people about what they need, especially in terms of understanding. Articulate very clearly, here's what I need you to understand about me or my work style or what's important to me. And make it clear also that the person doesn't have to necessarily agree with them or be on the same page, but make that sense of needing to be understood and what needs to be understood clearer for people so that people know what you need.
Okay, so let's go to type 5. And maybe you can start saying what is great, exceptional, and fabulous about fives at work.
Well, I think fives often develop a really high level of expertise about whatever field they're in. They tend to really master the information related to the work they do, partly because they're just very intellectually interested in things generally and often in what they do specifically. And also, I think they tend to be very objective. They're very good at taking the emotion out when it's not adding something or when it can be clouding the picture, and being really clear about what's most important and what needs to be attended to most, prioritizing things like that. What about you? What do you think is good about your type 5?
I think that fives usually have a very good systemic understanding of what is happening. They many times are one or two steps ahead in thinking of solutions, new systems, and they engage with complexity and they engage with thoughts that are important in organizations and processes. They are usually very logical and also very patient and clear in explaining things for others. And that's very good, although they many times have challenges in relationships. They can also be very helpful.
That's very clear. I think on the challenging side, fives can have a tendency to want to keep information to themselves, to not always realize what they need to share, and that other people need to be filled in on what they're thinking. They can be very mental and, again, analytical in a good way, but that can lead to not being in touch with emotions enough, and so not knowing how to create a bond or a connection with someone that they're working with in order to collaborate well. So I think people issues can be challenging for fives in terms of not always knowing how to deal with conflicts or other people's emotions or difficult situations that require understanding both how they're feeling, how someone else is feeling, and what might be happening in the relationship on a level that they're kind of not paying as much attention to. So, what do you think are challenging tendencies for fives at work?
There are several that I can say, but one or two are that fives create a big backlog of work. They put people on hold, they make them wait. And this is because they don't want to be interrupted or give up having their own plans of what they want to do. And other people's are not as important for them as they are for other people of other type. It's even more difficult if things are urgent, you know? So they many times don't make themselves available. And another challenge is that fives undercommunicate, even in circumstances like people don't really know what they are working at. Fives are working, but people assume they are not doing much. I've seen this a lot. They are just doing things silently.
Yes, being a little bit too independent, perhaps. So, what's a challenge you would pose for fives to improve their working relationships and experience?
The challenge is to speak out, to just say things that you believe in. Don't wait. Say even if you're not sure about them.
I would say be clear in your own mind that you're more mental than you are emotional, and other people may be more emotional than they are mental, and that sometimes there may be clarification needed in terms of what you're thinking and feeling and what they may be thinking and feeling, and to respect the emotional level and also understand that it's like people operate on different channels, and sometimes we just need to clarify what channel we're operating on without making one better or worse than the other. So, shall we move on to type six? What are some strengths that sixes bring to work?
Sixes usually see what other people don't see. They are very smart, usually, and they think of risks and go ahead preventing problems that the organization can have in ways that are incredible. Sometimes they help organizations not get into big trouble. Another thing about sixes is that they don't simply do things when they are not ready for them. They are very consistent. When they go do, it's because they are really ready and things will go well. Not that this is good for sixes in personal level from the self-development perspective, but it's usually appreciated by the organization, of course. And also, I think that sixes are really loyal. They usually say what they think, also, and they have this brilliant capacity of seeing both the big picture and then narrowing down to details, which is rare and really good. What do you think are other strengths for sixes?
I think sixes are excellent problem solvers. They're very good at finding the problems and really applying themselves in very intelligent, analytical ways to solve problems before they happen. So they're excellent troubleshooters, they're good planners, they're good at poking holes in a plan to proactively imagine what could go wrong so that they can prepare for any contingency. And so I think that is a very valuable thing to have on the team. I also think they're just very good at analyzing what's happening, at breaking things down into pieces and understanding, what's positive about a situation, but what's negative and what might not work. And so I think in that way, their mind is very good. They tend to be very intuitive and be able to think ahead of what could forecasting potential problems so that things can end up going well. What do you think can be some more challenging tendencies or issues for sixes in their work?
Anxiety is one, because that may spread around certain nervousness to other people and lead to some decisions that are not the wisest. Also, sixes procrastinate decisions at times, and many times actually they become reluctant to being in their own authority. These are some challenges. What do you think are other ones?
I agree. I know some leaders I've worked with have had issues around being decisive and owning their power. When others are looking to you to be the authority, that can be a challenging situation. I also think that others can perceive them as too negative. When they're looking for problems, they can become problem seekers and find problems where there aren't any, or focus too much on what's not working or what could go wrong, to the point where they create a morale problem where people kind of get brought down, or they can have a feeling that there's too much of a focus on what's negative or not working. Now, most sixes will say they're not pessimistic, they're realistic. But I do think sixes can benefit from seeing how their mindset can lead them to not also look for opportunities and notice what is working well. And I guess that would be my challenge I would pose to sixes, to look for opportunities as well as threats, and to really celebrate and identify good things that are happening, so that people understand that it's not only the problems that we should be concerned about, and to be able to share a positive view of what's happening as well as uh, a critical view. What about you? What challenge would you pose, or what do you think are some challenging tendencies for sixes?
I think the challenge you mentioned is really important, but maybe I could add a challenge of being less anxious again and calmer, just listening to people, giving some time for the processes to happen, be less anxious in general.
Great idea. So let's move on to seven. What do you think are some of the positives that sevens bring to their work?
Sevens are usually quite happy and engaged with things happening, and they make other people feel good around them. Many times I heard from teams saying that said, "We miss a seven here." And also, there is a way that sevens are creative, innovative, a little bit like fours, but leaning more towards the positive sides of things. And they are also very good in going around difficult situations, dealing with them almost by not dealing with them, finding ways around them, but also having great new ideas. They're great in brainstorming. What do you think are good things for sevens?
I agree that they tend to be very innovative, out of the box thinkers, and very visionary. Often they make leaders that have bold ideas and imagine what could happen in creative ways. They inspire people by focusing on what's possible. I also think they focus on the positive, which is a good thing for morale. They want to make work fun. They want people to enjoy themselves. And this is often something that's a big plus if you're working with people, because it's like you're motivated to get along with them and to have a pleasant experience at work, which isn't always necessarily a positive experience for everyone. What do you think is more challenging for sevens?
It's very challenging to stop brainstorming and to get down to work and implement, to carry on doing things when they're not getting as much pleasure from them as before. It's also difficult for sevens to give harsh feedback in more direct ways for people when they need. And when sevens get promoted, then become leaders, sometimes it's difficult for them to legitimate themselves as such because they are very egalitarian and they treat people of all levels the same way. Sometimes they don't convey the necessary sense of authority that they have. What would you add?
Yeah, those are good ones. I would say the tendency to not want to look at the negative data, at what's not working, the difficulty they have with having the difficult conversation when something needs to be addressed that's not positive. I also think they are very sensitive to being limited in any way. And I just think that sometimes you need to experience or welcome some limitations in a way that can be very difficult for them. For instance, having too many ideas. I've heard teams complain that the leader has great ideas, but doesn't sink deeply into implementing a few, but instead has a lot of different ideas that keeps them more unfocused. I also think sevens can have a hard time in hierarchical situations. They tend to want to flatten hierarchies because they don't want someone telling them what to do, and they also don't want to tell others what to do. They can have authority issues that aren't as obvious as, say, in sixes, because what they do is they rebel in softer, less easy to see ways. Naranjo called it soft rebellion. There's a way that they may not want to be controlled by the authority or the boss, and so make friends with the boss or charm people or do things that are more positive seeming or friendly, but is really a way of not being controlled or limited in any way. And sometimes that may be necessary in a certain situation. What would you pose as a challenge for a seven in order if they wanted to improve?
My challenge is stay. Just stay. Stay doing what you're doing. Stay at a particular job, not trying to change to another one too quickly. Stay specializing because it may be good for you in the future. Stay in that course of action. Don't change it. Don't come up with new ideas. Learn how to stay in general. At times, you can innovate, but stay.
Mine would be simpler, but at a different level. I would say try to be more present. Try to sink into the present moment a little bit more without needing to think of a new idea or move away. Sevens can have an underlying fear that if they really allow themselves to slow down and be present, that they may get caught up in an emotion or an experience that is uncomfortable. And it's funny what you say about staying in a job. I have a friend who was doing very well at a company and was offered the golden handcuffs, where a company wants to give you a big bonus if you stay at the company for a certain amount of years. And he never wanted that because it felt too limiting. Now he ended up staying at the company much longer than that amount of years they wanted to give him the big bonus for. But it was hard for him to get his mind around that. So I think it's really important on these different levels for sevens to be able to kind of slow down and pause and put in roots a little bit without feeling too threatened by that. So now we've covered all 9 types, and it's time for our top 5.
Top 5.
What is our top 5 today, B?
Our top 5 is the top 5 types that tend to be the most corporate, that tend to have a mindset that fits in well in a corporate setting. So would you like to start? What is your number 5 most corporate type?
Yes, it's an interesting top 5 this time. I was in a doubt, especially about my 5th and my 4th. I left out some types that I'm not sure I should have left them out. But my number 5 is type 2, especially social twos. I think that twos adapt quite easily to different things, and that includes the corporate world. And it's not the same when it comes to adapting to being less emotional, but adapting to being more corporate and looking, so they do that quite a lot. What is your 5th?
My number 5 is a tie, actually. It's my only tie among my top 5, but it's a tie between 1 and 9. Because I see both of these types a lot in corporate environments. I think they are both types that are mostly okay with kind of going along with the authority and fitting into the process and structure that's often part of a corporate environment, and being comfortable in different roles in a corporate environment. So that's my number 5 is a tie between 1 and 9. Shall I go to my number 4? My number 4 is 7. As I work in companies, I find a lot of 7s. I think 7s like the challenge and the creativity of being in a corporate environment, and I think they make it fun for themselves. I just see that there are a lot of 7 leaders. They have an entrepreneurial spirit and often inject a lot of positivity, and I think they enjoy doing that. So I would say 7 would be number 4. They aren't at the top, of course, because they don't love hierarchy, and they can be sensitive to being controlled and not having fun, which sometimes, let's face it, corporate life isn't fun. Or doing tedious things, but I do find that they're there a lot, and sometimes they do workarounds to find a way to have a good experience, even if the work isn't what you might call fun. So that's my number 4. What's your number 4?
My number 4 is 1. I see many ones in corporates, but I also think that in this new kind of organization that is much more flexible, informal, that the traditional one is not as attracted to as before, to this kind of corporates. The environment is not as favorable for ones as before. This is why I have ones only on the 4th place. But of course, they can adapt well, especially if they do inner work. And there are still many ones in organizations. They are capable of working with more flexibility. I think that social ones are even more corporate than other subtypes. But what is your number 3B?
My number 3 is social 2. And this is my only subtype specific ranking, but I would say social 2. I see a lot of social 2s at high levels in organizations. In fact, whenever I work with a new team, for some reason, I'm always a little bit surprised that there's, 1 or 2 or even 3 social 2s. And of course, other 2s also. I think self-preservation 2s especially can show up. But I think social 2s are the ones that are a little bit more oriented toward power and leadership. And I just see them a lot. And I think they function well in corporate environments. What about you? What's your number 3?
My number 3 is 7, which was your 4th. 7s are really present in organizations that I work for almost always. I think that I may be a bit biased, though, as a Brazilian who worked in that country for so long. Brazil is a 7-ish country, and 7s found it easier to work in Brazilian organizations that they may find it somewhere else. We in Brazil don't separate as much work and fun, professional and personal. So it's very different from where I live now here in the UK. Now, I think that especially self-press sevens bring a lot of qualities that are sought after. What is your number 2, B?
My number 2 is 8. 8s, I think, do really well in corporate environments, especially in the United States, but maybe in the West. Generally, I think they are very oriented toward meeting big challenges and wielding power and enjoy being in a position of leadership. I think their fearlessness makes it easy for them to be in difficult situations of different kinds and function well. So 8 is my number 2. What about you? What's your number 2?
So I want to comment first on what you said. I don't have 8s on my top 5. I definitely agree with you, don't take me wrong, with all you said. We see many 8s in organizations, but why haven't I included 8s? I had in my mind, perhaps, the capacity to be more like a corporate person. I think that 8s don't embody this as much because they go against the norms, the rules, and they are not very conventional. They are controversial. They don't hide information. They say what they think that I got a different angle. I agree with you that 8s are really present, and maybe I should have included them on my top 5. But my number 2 is type 9. I've seen so many 9s everywhere I went. They come to different kinds of jobs. They adapt a lot, but especially in operational areas, as we said before. Now, I think that self-press 9s, above all, tend to be very corporate. I remember Claudio Naranjo saying that self-preservation 9s is the homus economicus, and also the archetype of the banker, as he said. But other 9s also adapt. I've seen so many 9s, it's more empirical, you know? So I think that most probably we are going to agree on who the number 1 is.
I imagined we would both have 3 as our number 1. I think type 3s, both in ways that benefit them and maybe in ways that aren't so good for them and their personal growth, are very good at blending in well and in succeeding in corporate environments. When I was writing my book, The 9 Types of Leadership, I interviewed over 20 leaders because I wanted to bring in the experience of people who had worked with their type, their Enneagram type, both in their own development and also in the work they did and in their organizations, to give people a sense of real life testimony from those leaders. And I found I could find a lot of 8s and 3s to interview. Less so for some of the other types, but there were a lot of 3s that I found that would talk to me and really helped me in terms of understanding both the type 3 at work and also what 3s had done to bring the Enneagram into organizations. But yes, I think 3s, their personality style lines up really well with the reward system, the culture, the requirements of corporate environments. What would you add to that about why you chose 3 as your top number 1 point?
3s get excited about the opportunities of growth, the fact that all organizations have goals, they have competition somehow. So it's normal that 3s become corporate and they adapt quite easily to become whatever the external environment wants them to be. So to become corporate people and to come across as being such, it's not difficult for most 3s. Now, having said that, I look back I looked back and I saw more self-preservation threes as corporate people. And right next, sexual threes, not socials. Why is that, in my view? I remember an interesting thing. Many times when I saw social threes at work, I saw that they had a need for more visibility than the organization could offer them. So I saw a few of them who decided to become university professors in parallel or something else. Sometimes for social threes, they feel the need to grow bigger than the realm of that organization. But still, I saw all threes.
Yeah, I found a lot of self-preservation threes and social threes. A little bit less sexual threes, but also sexual threes are there as well. But I found those a lot of both kinds of subtypes of threes in corporate environments. Thank you for listening. Join us again for our Enneagram 2.0 podcast, where we talk about all things Enneagram.
Please click on like to help spread the word about our podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, Enneagram 2.0, find your personality. Chestnut, Paes, Enneagram Academy. What's your type? What's your subtype? So much you can learn. You can be amazing. Go ahead and transform. It's for yourself and others. Grow and follow the flow. And also for the planet, yeah, let your mind blow. It's from Beat and Uranio. Time for you to know and be your best self with Enneagram 2.0. Psychology, self-mastery, work in relationships, spirituality. Come and join the podcast. Oh yeah, it will be fun. Explore the challenges that from now you'll overcome. Hey, Enneagram 2.0. Tune in, yeah, it's your personality. Enneagram 2.0. Chestnut, Paes, Enneagram Academy. Hey, Enneagram 2.0. Tune in now.